Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are stepping into a high-stakes, almost cinematic corporate landscape. I mean, have you ever wondered why certain industries just seem to be run by this exclusive, untouchable club of megacorporations? Well, the answer lies in a very specific and honestly pretty ruthless market structure, the oligopoly. We're going to map out the territory, decode the strategies of these major players, and understand exactly how this unique environment shapes the prices of the everyday services we rely on.
Now, the DNA of this market structure is literally right there in its name. It comes from the Greek words oligo, which means few, and poly, meaning sellers. So we're not looking at the sprawling chaos of perfect competition with thousands of tiny merchants, right? And we're not looking at the solitary rule of a pure monopoly where a single king sits on the throne. Instead, an oligopoly is a market where just a small handful of firms produce the goods or services we buy. And whether those products are exactly identical or slightly differentiated, it doesn't matter. It's a realm entirely dominated by a very small, very powerful group of sellers.
To really get a feel for this, picture the global economy like a giant digital network map. Instead of a vast city filled with equal-sized buildings, an oligopoly is defined by just a handful of massive looming towers dominating the entire landscape. And because there are so few of them, these giant behemoths share a massive crowd of consumers. But here's the real kicker. They hold considerable joint control over price. They aren't just participating in the market, they're basically the architects of it.
And these everyday giants aren't abstract concepts. They're the dominant players powering our modern lives. Take mobile service providers or giant cement companies. Just think about it for a second. When you're shopping for a mobile phone plan, how many viable networks do you actually have to choose from? 3, maybe 4? You're essentially just choosing between a few dominant telecom towers. And the exact same thing goes for the cement companies that supply the literal physical foundations of our cities. Operating in these spaces requires such immense scale that only a few key players can actually survive.
But operating at this massive scale, it creates a really unique psychological state. These few firms are locked into what's known as an interdependence loop. Look, in a market with 10,000 sellers, you don't really care what one random competitor does. But in an oligopoly, every single action triggers an immediate competitor reaction. They are hyper-vigilant. They're constantly watching each other with radar-like precision, because a strategic move by one conglomerate literally shakes the ground for everybody else.
So let's walk through how this high-stakes loop actually plays out. Imagine a manager in corporate tower A suddenly drops their product's price to steal some customers. Instantly, and I mean instantly, warning radars go off in towers B and C. The competing firms notice the change, and to survive, those rivals frantically copy the exact same price adjustment to remain in the competition. This constant, high-stress cycle of action and immediate reaction, that is the absolute heartbeat of an oligopolistic market.
Okay, so you might be wondering, if they're constantly just matching each other's prices, how do they actually compete? Well, because price cuts are instantly neutralized by rivals, these market behemoths weaponize completely different tactics. They turn to flashy, high-budget warfare. Picture stadium-sized, hyper-aggressive advertising campaigns. These are designed solely to capture a huge part of the market without ever actually touching a price tag. In an oligopoly, advertising acts as a tremendously powerful instrument to outshine the competition.
Which brings us to an obvious question. If these dominant players are making so much money, why don't newcomers just open up shop and join the club? Well, the answer is strict barriers to entry. Sure, a firm can easily exit the industry whenever it wants, but stepping into it, that means facing a fortress wall. We're talking about navigating incredibly complex government licensing forms and legally binding patent restrictions. These strict barriers act as an ironclad defense, basically ensuring that the few players at the top remain the only players.
But hey, life inside this corporate fortress is far from neat and tidy. The internal reality of an oligopoly is defined by two incredibly volatile characteristics: a structural lack of uniformity and a deep, pervasive market uncertainty. The landscape is inherently chaotic. Just because there are only a few firms doesn't mean they're identical clones. And just because they watch each other like hawks doesn't mean they actually know what the other guy is planning next.
To put that into perspective, this lack of uniformity is really stark. If you line up the players in an oligopoly, you won't just see equal-sized behemoths. You might have a massive corporate conglomerate with huge market size and scale standing right next to a tiny, boutique local supplier. There's just a total structural lack of scale uniformity among the firms. Some are unimaginably colossal, others are surprisingly small, but they are all trapped in the exact same interdependent market structure, desperately trying to anticipate each other's next move.
And this structural chaos breeds the ultimate lingering question, which is uncertainty.
Operating in this environment is just a constant state of suspense. Because of the totally different behavior patterns of these differently sized players, the market is profoundly volatile. Tomorrow, these rivals might join hands and peacefully cooperate to maximize their profits, or they might start a brutal, all-out price war. So, the next time you pay your mobile phone bill, take a second to ask yourself, are the few key giants dominating that landscape currently shaking hands? Or are they quietly loading their weapons for tomorrow's corporate battlefield?